friends. Welcome to Nerdy Bitz. TLDL, too long, didn't listen. I'm your host, the Reverend Tracy, and this is where we take a brief but deeper dive into the psychology, neuroscience, and cultural concepts underneath this week's main episode. So this episode is a companion to our main conversation on stepmoms and blended families. And honestly, I think stepmoms may be one of the few family roles that culture often frames with suspicion before people even encounter one personally. Like, genuinely. You can find evil stepmother stories everywhere from fairy tales to modern entertainment. Cinderella, Snow White, Hansel and Gretel. And we can start off with a fun fact. Apparently, in some of the earliest versions of Hansel and Gretel, the character was originally written as their biological mother, which honestly makes the later shift to the stepmother psychologically interesting all by itself, because it kind of shows that culturally we seem far more comfortable attaching cruelty and threat to the stepmother archetype than to motherhood itself. And researchers have actually started studying this. There's research looking at how stepmothers are culturally framed far more negatively than stepfathers, often portrayed as threatening, intrusive, controlling, jealous, or emotionally unsafe. And whether people consciously realize it or not, those narratives shape expectations, because culture does not just reflect our beliefs, it also reinforces them. And that matters because stepmotherhood is already psychologically complicated before stereotypes even enter the picture. One of the concepts researchers use a lot in stepfamily psychology is something called role ambiguity, which is basically exactly what it sounds like. Unclear expectations, unclear authority, unclear emotional boundaries, unclear responsibility. Researchers like Patricia Papernow have written extensively about how stepfamilies often struggle with unclear roles, mismatched expectations, and emotional boundary confusion, while people are trying to figure out how the family system is even supposed to function. And honestly, the more I read about it, the more it feels like stepmoms are often expected to function emotionally like parents, while simultaneously being reminded constantly that they are not really the parent. They're expected to care. They're expected to contribute, expected to emotionally invest in the family system. But if they become too involved, they can be accused of overstepping. If they stay too distant, they can be accused of not caring enough. If they discipline, it can be viewed as inappropriate. If they do not help parent at all, they can be viewed as disengaged. It's this constant psychological tightrope where the role itself is emotionally real, but socially unstable. And I think that instability is part of what makes stepmotherhood uniquely stressful in ways people sometimes underestimate. Because human beings generally function better when roles are clearly defined, when expectations make sense, when responsibilities and authority somewhat match each other. Role ambiguity is associated with chronic stress because people are constantly trying to calculate where they stand relationally. And honestly, blended families are often trying to build emotional systems that culture never fully gave people a blueprint for, which is where I want to bring in one of the analogies I've used before for blended families, and I did talk about this on this episode, that I call the family van. The idea is that everybody in the family system is inside the same moving vehicle, but they're all sitting in different seats with different views out of those windows. And biological parents are usually somewhere closer to the front. The kids are experiencing the ride from their own perspective, and the step-parent is also inside the van, emotionally invested in where everybody is going, but often not sitting in the front seats. Which means sometimes you genuinely cannot tell who is driving certain decisions, dynamics, or conflicts at any given moment. And as the kids get older, sometimes they start influencing the driving too, especially teenagers, which makes the system even more psychologically complicated because now multiple people are affecting the direction of the family at once. And I think one of the hardest parts of step parenting is that your perspective from inside the van can either be welcomed as helpful navigation or dismissed as the dreaded backseat driver. Sometimes the exact same concern gets interpreted completely differently depending on the emotional climate of the family. And that uncertainty is part of what makes the role psychologically difficult, because you're emotionally invested in the ride while never being fully sure how much input you're actually allowed to have. And I think that emotional uncertainty gets amplified by the stereotypes surrounding stepmothers specifically, because culturally, stepmoms are often framed as potential threats before they are framed as caregivers. and that affects how people interpret behavior. A biological mother setting a boundary might be viewed as protective. A stepmother setting the exact same boundary might be viewed as controlling. A biological parent expressing concern may be interpreted as caring. A step-parent expressing the same concern may be interpreted as intrusive. The exact same behavior can get filtered through completely different emotional assumptions, depending on the role of the person performing it. And to be clear, none of this means stepmothers are automatically right or automatically healthy. Stepparents are still human beings capable of dysfunction, insecurity, bad behavior, and unhealthy dynamics, just like anybody else. But I do think the role itself creates a uniquely difficult psychological balancing act, especially when someone is expected to emotionally invest in children they may deeply love, while also navigating unclear authority, social suspicion, loyalty conflicts, and family histories they were not originally present for. And honestly, I think one of the most overlooked things about blended families is that love alone does not automatically erase system complexity. People can genuinely care about each other and still struggle to figure out where everybody fits emotionally. That's normal. That's human. And I think conversations about step families become healthier when we stop viewing people as replacement parents or outsiders and start recognizing that blended families are their own kind of system entirely, not broken versions of nuclear families, different systems with different psychological challenges. And maybe part of the reason stepmotherhood can feel so emotionally exhausting is because the role often comes with high emotional expectations paired with low relational clarity. A lot of emotional responsibility, not always a lot of clearly accepted authority, which is a psychologically difficult place for almost anybody to exist, especially long term. And that's your Nerdy Bitz. Honestly, if fairy tales taught us anything, it's probably that stepmoms deserved a better publicist.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy
on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bye, friends.